recording, so few minutes we'll be ready.
Perfect. Should I just wait for the recording to start?
Well, it just started now.
Oh,
well,
perfect.
No time like the present. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Scribe. Joining me today is another author for our author interview series. His name is Andrew Dewey, or as you know him on Inkitt, A.D. Walker. He is the author of the 10th Dimension series, with his first book, the Fires Ignite, being on Inkitt, as well as the other series, which is a compilation of the 3 books, if I'm not mistaken. And to tell us more about that,
Yeah.
here he is.
Yeah, so I had originally envisioned these books as shorter 25,000 word novels. But as I've learned more about the industry, I understand that that's too short for the age demographic I've been writing for. So instead of the series called The 10th Dimension, I've decided all around to change it. And now I've consolidated what are going to be the first 4 books, or what were the first 4 books in the 10th Dimension, into one book, which is now called 5 Ordinary Teens and the Monarchs of the 10 Dimensions, which I envision as the first book in the series, which I'm thinking will be called maybe 5 Teens. Something.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So before we get into the book, tell us a little about yourself, Andrew. How did you started writing, and how did that whole process come about?
So I always loved writing. I always loved writing in school. I always took English classes when I had electives that were free. So really, I started writing these years ago when I was in university. I would skip my classes and just write these stories instead. I was not the greatest student, but that's what I liked doing. And then, as the years passed, life got busy, kind of stopped paying attention to the books for a couple of years, and then I just decided recently, why not try pursuing it again? So I've been going through them, kind of revising and editing, because they're definitely, I feel like they've been improved now that I've gone through and edited them a second time, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm working now on finishing what was the 4th book, but really what is the 4th part of the first book now in the new version.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
And speaking of the book series, what can you tell us about the series? Because it was the first book that I read for the initial impressions, was the first book in the series, The Fires Ignite, which sort of like the origins of all of these kids. And now, as you said, you've sort of combined the whole series together into like a sort of like one book divided into different parts. So what can you tell us about the 10th Dimension series?
So I'm going to say the first book, which, like you said, is in 4 parts. So part 1 is The Fire Ignites, and that is exactly like you said, the origin story of these 5 kids getting their new powers and kind of getting introduced to the world that these new powers come with. So the general theme or overall kind of world is that there are 10 different dimensions. Each of those dimensions are associated with a different element and are populated with an entirely different species. So there's the fire dimension and the water dimension, something like that. So each of the kids receive powers of one of those dimensions, and there are 3 monarchs within each dimension. So within the fire dimension, there are 3 monarchs or kings, 1 king, 2 princes, princesses, 1 queen, just some combination of 3 who are the monarchs of that dimension and have those powers. So there are 3 fire monarchs who have the powers of fire. And now all of a sudden, we, or the kids who are from our world, or the 10th dimension, have 5 monarchs. The 5 kids have these superpowers. So the series is kind of following the interactions of these 5 kids who have just stumbled onto these superpowers and have to interact and manage their lives amongst the kings and queens, princes and princesses of the other 9 dimensions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, in the first part, and the origin story, there's also different animals that correlate to each of the five children, because one of the children can see one animal, but the others don't see, and that's kind of the same for all five of them. Now, is there like a specific reason for these five animals? Do they have like a symbolism to this universe?
Yeah, so this, again, these four parts to the first book, I'm really envisioning as the introduction to what will be a much larger series. I would love to write these for a very long time. So the animals are introduced very early in the first book, or the first part, I should say. And then they don't really get mentioned again for quite some time. So really, as far as anyone knows, anyone who's reading up to date as I release chapters on Inkitt, nobody has heard further mention of these animals and knows how they're going to fall into the greater scheme. So I don't want to say too much because I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to bleed them into the overarching story, but those animals will certainly be coming back, and they are absolutely symbolic of the characters who see their specific animal.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So when you began writing this initially and then looking back at it again and kind of reorganizing it, has your initial thought process and initial vision changed from when you first started writing the 10th Dimension series and to now? And if so, what specifically has changed, and has your kind of whole story arc of the series changed?
Absolutely. It has changed substantially as I've gone further along. And that's why I have to keep doing more edits. And then as I write more chapters, I have to jump back and do edits to part one. There are little conversations between characters so that everything aligns. I'm trying to be a stickler for plot holes. So I'm trying to go back and make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing at the wrong point. But when I first started writing them, again, I was in university. I didn't really have any plan whatsoever. I was frustrated because I had tried to write for adults, and I felt like there was a lot of pressure writing for adults. So I started writing young adult fiction. I thought it would be more fun, and for me, it just removed any pressure associated with it. And I just kind of went. I just started throwing ideas down, and I didn't know what the story was going to be. I just wanted to see what would happen. And one page at a time, everything kind of started falling together, and it's just been a million reviews and revisions over. I think I probably have 15 Word documents, the Fire Ignites version 1.1, 1.2, that have just kept getting changed over the years so that everything fell into place. Because
Wow.
version 1.1 is not good.
Man, I have never known, probably the only person that I've had on this show that has said that they've had a lot of revisions, because typically the people I've talked to, they've almost done the same thing, but usually it's the same Word document that they said, oh, edit 1, edit 2, but you actually have 15 different documents for the thing. And it must be also have to be very careful, like not to choose the wrong one. So it's always good to have like a number that's like, wait a minute, no, this is 14. No, I need the newest one. I don't want the old one.
I'm a stickler for that. I'm very diligent with my document management. So I'm on top of that for sure.
Awesome. So let's actually talk about sort of like the sit down to where you actually want to become a writer. And I think you mentioned this before, but becoming a writer and thinking this more as a possible career. So when did that idea come to your mind? Was that sort of like when you were writing the 10th Dimension series, or was that a little bit earlier in your life?
I've always loved writing. I've always loved the idea of becoming an author, published author, and then you kind of, I guess you still have a boss in the sense like you have a publisher, you still have deadlines, but at the same time, it gives you so much freedom, and it's all about just creativity. So I've always kind of, that's a dream job for me. But the process of applying to publishers is tedious and time consuming, and when you get rejected 1,000 times, it's always a little disheartening. So it hasn't happened yet. Again, life brought me into a very different career path, but I'm hoping maybe one day this will work out for me.
I hope so too, because yeah, it's not easy when writing and then getting rejected a lot, because I definitely think because you started writing for, you say you wrote now into the market of young adult fiction, which I think, and I talked with this a lot before with other people, is when you write for a specific market, it's kind of a little bit tricky because with adults, it's kind of easier because there's a lot more genres that can appeal to more adults. But when you go younger, now you're narrowing in on your target audience, and you have to think, okay, what are typically the books that young adults are reading? And sometimes it's young adult fiction, other times it's like straight up adult fiction because they can actually understand these very complex themes, these diverse characters. So that is a challenge. And did that ever come into your mind of like this audience that you were writing for, or were you initially writing for yourself because you enjoyed this book series so much that this is something that you would want to buy?
Yeah, it's definitely something I would like to buy. Again, it took the pressure off me to think about writing for young adults rather than for adults. That's probably just an issue I have to deal with. It's not necessarily something that would be relevant to everybody. But I know what I like. I was I was an avid reader as a child. I read all the time. This is the kind of stuff that I liked reading, and really I'm writing for myself. And I feel like I am giving young adults, or even if younger kids are reading it, a lot of credit. I don't think the themes are too simple, and I'm definitely aiming for character development and character complexity. But I also know that my writing style is very simplistic. I don't think I use advanced words or terminology. I don't go too in depth on descriptions. I let the reader use their imagination a lot, and I think I'm good at capturing that balance between description and imagination, and letting the reader picture it for themselves. But just I envision my writing appealing more to a YA young adult audience than to an adult audience.
Right.
I think adults might find something they enjoy in it as well.
Definitely. And speaking of on your characters, I definitely think probably a testament to you as a writer is making the kid characters or the children characters actually feel and act like kids of their age, because I think it's probably one of the most daunting and challenging things. Writing fictitious adult characters is a lot easier than writing fictitious young adults or even children, because with adults we're able to figure out, okay, what they would act like because we ourselves are in that age range. But when we go younger and we know the generation's vastly different from how we were, it's like, okay, what exactly is the modern kid gonna act like? How is he gonna talk? What's his personality? I mean, you can have like kind of like not too complex or maybe complex depending on the character, but you definitely want them to act like their age and not have them speak or sound like an adult main character, because that may be a little confusing. But I definitely will say that the 5 main characters in your series are a testament to your writing capabilities, because they act like children, they act like kids, which I think it's just a huge applause to you.
Thank you. I'm flattered. I'm glad they seem like children. That's definitely what I'm going for.
Awesome. So when you initially started writing this and sort of taking a break from it just to like reevaluate and going back to it, what made you go back to it? Like, what is your why? What made you decide to give this another shot?
Frankly, I again, I've always thought about it. It's always been in the back of my mind. It's kind of a project that was, well, it was a passion project for so long that fell off. And I don't think you just forget about passion projects. They just kind of fade away for a bit. And then I heard about Inkitt, and I just thought, what the hell? And I uploaded my most recent version at the time of The Fire Ignites Part 1 onto the website, and started getting some traction and some really good reviews, and that kind of inspired me. You know, people do want to read this, or people who are finding it are enjoying it, and I thought, let's pursue this.
Awesome. And when you got on Inkitt and uploaded your draft on your story, or your most recent edit at the time, what was the initial feedback like? Was it positive? Was it mixed? And do you remember like your very first comment on your story, be it a comment on your on a chapter or a page or a review?
So I'll be honest, I don't recall what the first one was. I did get quite a few reviews. So I started out, I did a lot of review swaps, and I was reading a lot of other people's work and going back and forth like that. I also got a lot of comments because I submitted the book to the Inkitt book club and they selected that. So a lot of people read it on that particular week. And the feedback has honestly been really, really positive. I think I have 2,700 reads, which is a lot of that's per chapter, and by Inkitt's analytics, that's only 10% of what they need. So I still need a lot more reads in order to actually be registered for anything. But of that number of reads, I think I have 20 reviews at 4.9 star average. And again, everything's been so positive, and I really appreciate that. Of course, some constructive criticism as well. But
yes, that's often really important too. Like constructive criticism is really good, but it also has to be mindful when either we get constructive criticism or you receive it. It's always best that it's critical in the sense that it's just pointing out things that we didn't notice writing and not coming off as rude, because I'm sure you can imagine probably reading stories from other people. You probably have seen their reviews that may not have been the best in terms of feedback and may not have given enough. I'm sure you probably have seen or may have gotten, as I call, the one-line reviews where it's just one sentence, which is nice, but what specifically about the story did you like or had questions about? Because that helps us as a writer and also helps other writers as well with their stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy, but hey, that's lessons learned. We learn from our peers, we learn from those that review us, and we also learn from ourselves. And with that, we also we also read other stories to see, how they've approached these characters, how they do story structure. So for you, growing up, what were sort of your role model authors that kind of stuck with you in terms of great storytelling?
So when I read a lot. I was a bookworm for sure. So I'm sure it's cliche to say these days, but I read the Game of Thrones series, The Song of Ice and Fire, long, long ago, right when the books were coming out. So those were very meaningful to me and definitely inspired taking. So in my book, I write from the perspective of all 5 main characters. In different chapters, you're getting a perspective from one of the 5. That was definitely inspired by Game of Thrones, because that's a very, at least for me, that was new for me to read it, and I thought that was very cool to read from different perspectives, and you get different views of the world and different interpretations of the same event. It's really interesting to me. Another big one when I was a kid was Animorphs. I loved the Animorphs.
Oh my gosh! Now that makes me feel old, because I remember reading. Well, I never read Animorphs growing up, but I definitely saw the covers, because the covers. I mean, okay, listeners, for those that don't know Animorphs, it was a popular series, in probably the early 2000s era, give or take. And it followed a group of kids that had these powers to turn into animals, and they had sort of an alien helper that kind of told them, what he could do and who's coming. And if I'm not mistaken, spoilers alert, I think broccoli was the main weakness to some of the aliens, or one of the aliens. I don't remember. Like I said, I've never read the series. I just remember certain plot elements.
Yeah, so that series, it was kids get superpowers, and the books were around the same length as the Fire Ignites, so that was a major inspiration. I'm also doing 5 kids get superpowers, and trying to explore the world.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny, because when I read your book, the 10th Dimension, I don't know why, but it actually reminded me of a story that I did back in middle school, which was The Seven, which followed a group of kids almost around the same age as yours that had superpowers, and they were going up against a general named General Zahn. And this was pretty much just a spin-off or just an homage to like the 80s and 90s cartoons. But funnily enough, that story soon deviated into 3 different stories that I'm currently working on. And it's like, dang, that is weird. It's so crazy. And
Very cool.
yeah, it's so bizarre. But that's always the fun of writing, just to take plot elements from current stories and adapt them into new stories that we may write or we may not write, but just like to play with the ideas. So have you ever done that in your own like free time, like kind of jot down different stories from like a plot device or a plot structure in the 10th Dimension?
And try to apply it to other stories of my own? Not so much, but I definitely take inspiration from other things that I read and think about how I can implement those into my future writings in the 10th Dimension, where, future books, spin-offs, different perspectives or other characters I could write from. So instead of going kind of out of the dimension or the book series, it's more pulling stuff more into my series.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, you talked about joining Inkitt to see, how this community goes. And maybe you could talk about that, your personal experience with Inkitt in terms of like the readership, the people you've met. Because when I first got on Inkitt, that was like maybe early 2020. And I just put down stuff on there just because I had like a whole bunch of stories, which I was like, I have all these stories. I'm going to see what happened. And from there, it kind of just snowballed into some positive feedback and a positive journey for me going forward. So did you have any idea how Inkitt would impact you in your writing career? Or did you think this was just going to be a place where you could just put your stories, kind of take a step back, and if people read it, they read it. If not, they not. And you would just focus on getting this ready for a publishing house?
So I went into it with more of the latter of what you're saying, like just put it out there, see what happens. If people read it, they read it. I wasn't necessarily planning on getting involved in the website or the community or anything like that. I'm historically very bad at getting involved in any online community. I'm not a guy who comments or texts or does that kind of stuff. So that's tough for me. But I've been on, I think I first put the book on in November of last year. So I've been on for a couple months now. And a lot of people have been leaving comments or reviews. So of course I'll comment back. And while I'm reading their work, I'm leaving reviews and comments. I'm enjoying it. I think the community is very receptive and very positive, even when people don't have or think there's room for improvement or they leave their criticisms. Everyone's always nice about it, which is great. I do find there are some comments or opinions that I just disagree with, but I think that's probably, that's humanity. That's the way.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm more involved in the Inkitt community, and I'm getting more out of it than I had anticipated I would going in.
Nice. Well, that's good. That's good. And getting on Inkitt and sort of feeling the waters a little bit more now, who have been like your biggest supporters and people that you've met that you kind of have like a good friendship with, that you can just review their stories and that if you say, hey, can you review my story, they're going to give you good feedback?
Let me pull that up just so I don't get any names wrong. Of course, yourself.
Thank you.
You've been great. I'm very happy to be here. I haven't said it yet here, but thank you so much for, for giving me this interview. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So looking through, there's a user named DM Riddle. I don't know much about her, but she's left so many really amazing, useful comments on my writing, which was great. It's such a long, thorough review of my work. Her writing is also amazing, and I haven't left a review on her work yet, which I regret, and I promise I'll get it to you too. Get it to you soon. Yeah, very high opinions there. I also have a couple of readers who are just regularly coming back. As I release a chapter, they're there and reading it, and that always means so much. Kim Applegren, also great.
Oh yes, dear old
know,
Kim.
yeah, I know you and her know each other, and she
Mm-hmm.
has her Facebook group, and she posted a review there, so I very much appreciate that. Yeah, I think that sums it up. Morgan, I appreciate all of your regular comments, but beyond the username Morgan, I don't know much about her.
Nice, very nice. Well, it almost seems like a good group, and if I also if I could also make some more recommendations for people to look into to see who's gonna give good feedback. Timothy Nodman, he's another good friend of mine who's giving like good feedback. Maverick's Ghosts, he's another good friend of mine on Inkitt who's write the last Mega series, which is probably the most complex wizarding story I have ever read, but he's got about 5 books. They're probably in total maybe 36 chapters each. So I read reviews for those, but man, those were long. MB Demore, she's another good one. Autumn Amber, who I had recently on my podcast, she's a fantastic reader as well as a great storyteller, so she's another good one. So it kind of almost seems, well, I think we both share a couple few, Kim being one of them, and I also know, as you went back to your site recently, that Kim actually made you an awesome kind of like little business thing you could use to help build your own writing brand. So that was pretty cool of her to do. So that was awesome.
Yeah, she's great. I very much appreciate everything she's done.
Nice. And so we've kind of talked about, authors, the people you've met, and everything. So now I'm going to kind of go back to almost like the author thing, but kind of a little bit different is what books would you say challenge you to be a better writer in the sense of character development, story structure, plot holes, and stuff like that? What books challenge you to make something better in your specific genre or in a genre different than the one you're used to?
So I even as an avid reader, I read very specific genres. I like my fantasy. I like my adventure. That's where I go. So I can't really comment on anything that challenges me outside of my genres because I don't read outside of it.
Right.
I know, again, it's probably just standard thing for a person to say these days, but Game of Thrones is, again, I think, such a good standard for anyone trying to really capture characters and development and purpose. And the writing is so well done and so purposeful and detailed. And, the shows are great too, but the books are really where George Martin captures everything. And I feel he does it in such a good way too, because his novels are extremely long. I don't know how many words they are, but they're extremely long. And yet, and detailed, and there's so much history and there's so much different, I'm tripping over my words, there's so many different convoluted storylines going on at the same time, and yet he manages to tell you all of this without it dragging on and being tedious. And that is such an inspiration. And reading that, I have to look back on my own and be like, oh, what am I doing? So
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. For me, I'm big into historical fiction. Anyone that's read a lot of my stories, specifically The Gathering, has a lot of, even though it is fantasy story, a lot of the main characters are from historical time periods and they view the world from their own historical lenses. And one of my first attempts into like historical fiction, but a little alternate history and fantasy was Amnetus, Son of Persia. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but it follows a character from The Gathering. And then I had Decimus, which I was starting to write on, but I took a pause from that to work on Michael, the Last Angel of Earth, which I was a little nervous about that story because that delved in a lot of religious symbolism, figures, as well as a lot of mythological characters from a lot of the great ancient myths, Greece, India, Europe, um, Egypt, parts of Africa. So I was really conscious about, okay, I really want to make this good. It's not going to be too religious in the sense it's going to come off as preachy. It's just going to be like a fantasy story where you have these religious characters, religious figures existing in the modern world. And that also stems from like a lot of other writings that I've read, a lot of fantasy stories which have helped. And if I also can make a recommendation, if you like, since you like Game of Thrones, I think you will like this series. It's called Redwall, and I'm the kids Game of Thrones, which that's not an off description, everybody. Redwall is kind of like a kid Game of Thrones, save for a lot of major things in the real Game of Thrones, which are not present in Redwall. But in a sense, it's the same with Game of Thrones is a character that you love. Yeah, they may not last through the whole book. They may just die, or someone may just leave and never come back. But that to me was a very powerful book that really helped my writing. I think you would also agree that for you, Game of Thrones has impacted your writing as well and has sort of like helped you shape what you want for your characters, for your story, and ultimately what you want to say, which is evident.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I will agree. Redwall is a phenomenal series as well. I loved reading Redwall. It was always fun. All the stories were very well done.
Awesome. Awesome. And let us see, because we're actually making really good time, and there's only a few last questions. So I'll save the last two for kind of the very end. But probably one of the big questions that I did want to ask you was, with everything that you've done on Inkitt and your own personal life, and just seeing how well your story has gone thus far, have you ever had a sense of validation from the people that you've met within the Inkitt or even outside writing community saying, we love what you work on, you belong here, like this is where you belong, that sense of validation? Because if you're a new author and this is like open waters for you, it's kind of daunting, kind of a little intimidating when you're stepping your toe into a kind of a pool of people that have had years of experience to hone their craft and kind of feeling like, do I really belong here? Am I like an imposter?
Yeah,
It's kind of terrifying.
it's absolutely terrifying. Absolutely, again, the community's been great. The comments have been great. Everyone's so supportive, and I think that makes sense too, because even those who are not publishing their works on Inkitt probably are thinking about writing, or like they're obviously readers, and I think any reader has thought about writing, whether or not they go get around to it. So the community is going to be familiar with that fear of putting your work forward, and so I think people are particularly sensitive to that and kind to the people who they're reviewing or reading or commenting on. And then in the real world, I got a lot of validation because again, years ago, I printed out a bunch of hard copies of the books, and some friends or family of the friends of some family friends gave the books to their nieces or nephews who were of kind of the relevant age, and the kids, the teenagers, young teenagers, really liked it, and they really gave extremely positive reviews. That was very satisfying as well, because that's the demographic you're writing for, and they're enjoying it, even if it's a sample size of 6. It still means something.
That's actually really good. That's actually really good. And kind of speaking of that sample size and going back to initially what you said about trying to get it published, is traditional publishing the avenue you want to go to, or have you thought about doing like self-publishing or another different route. And can you talk about your own experiences with publishing and kind of being wary of the sharks in the water? And the sharks, I mean the more hybrid publishing or vanity publishing, which is like the big no-no in the publishing world.
Yeah, so actually after university, I did a postgraduate program in publishing. So I really learned quite a lot about the publishing world in that program. In a perfect world, I want to go the classic route. I would love to get in with one of the big publishing houses and they accept it, and then they can do whatever editing they want and they can market it, because I'd gladly give up any percentage, whatever that percentage is, for them to own the marketing and own the everything that comes along with that, because I find that very challenging. That hasn't gone according to plan. I have not been accepted anywhere that I've applied, so self-publishing is definitely the next best option as far as I'm aware, or as far as I've been thinking. So I might try to get the book up on Amazon or on Kindle in the next couple months once I finish it, because again, I still have to complete part 4. But in a perfect world, I would definitely be with the classic publishing route.
Yeah, and that's probably the most daunting thing. Like a lot of people that I've talked to have wanted to do traditional publishing, but traditional publishing is not easy because sometimes you'll need an agent to represent you. Other times, if they accept unsolicited submissions, you got to really sell your pitch, really sell your story. Because that's the thing people don't really take into consideration is the pitch. Your story may be good, but if your pitch falters, they're not going to look at it.
Yeah.
I've learned that the hard way, that you have to sell it. It's like your cover letter applying for a job. You have to tell them why your story is good and why it's going to make the company money. Because at the end of the day, publishers need to make money off of books, and they're not going to publish a book that's not going to generate revenue for them, which is the sad, unfortunate truth, but it's a very harsh truth.
It is what it is, right? And then that you said it's like a cover letter, which is totally accurate. And like a cover letter, you have to customize it, I think, to the particular literary agent or publisher who you're writing to. It's not like you can just have one and send it to everyone. You really need to look at their profile and see what they like and why they like it, and try and match that. And it's a lot of work.
Yes, it's daunting. It is. Well, we've almost reached the very end of the interview, but there are 2 last major questions that I want to ask before we end our session. The first one is, what is your word of wisdom to the young authors out there who want to get their feet wet in the world of writing?
Just go for it. Just put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and just start spewing whatever you can. Don't worry about getting the perfect paragraph right every time. Don't worry about your font choice. Just write. And if you end up repeating the same idea 5 times in one chapter, that's fine. You'll go back and edit. But don't get crippled by the idea of writing something perfectly. Just put your ideas down and keep moving forward. And I think that's what worked for me.
Awesome. Awesome. And the last question that I think is probably the most important question is, how has Inkitt and writing changed your life? And have you ever thought of how different your own life would be if maybe you didn't put your stories on Inkitt, get the feedback from the community, and just went a different route? In other words, has Inkitt changed your life in terms of writing for the better?
Yes. So again, I've only been on Inkitt for a couple months, maybe I think almost 6 months now, maybe not even 6 months. So it's easy to see where my life would be without Inkitt, because that's where I was 6 months ago. But it has definitely changed my perspective and my writing, because it's got me writing again. I hadn't written in years. I hadn't looked at these in a long time, and now in my free time, I'm opening up my Word documents and writing. That's tough because work is busy, and I have a 9-month-old son, and I've spent time with my wife, of course. So it's hard to find time, but now when I do find that time, it's spent writing, and that is absolutely attributed to Inkitt.
Awesome. Awesome. That's actually really cool. Well, listeners, we've reached the end of our interview with Andrew Dewey, or A.D. Walker on Inkitt, for those that know him as that. But before we end today's interview, Andrew, would you like to tell people where they can find you and engage with you? Are you solely on Inkitt, or do you have other social media handles?
So right now I'm only on Inkitt, so that's the place to go. I do have a website, but the URL is still the 10th Dimension, which is the old series title. I haven't quite landed on the new series title, but it's going to have to change now that I've changed the whole formatting of the book. So if you want to go to www.the-10th.dimension.com, that is my website, but it's outdated, so I don't know how long that will continue to be functional. And on Inkitt, you can definitely find me. Just search for the books. Again, 5 Ordinary Teens and the Monarchs of the 10 Dimensions, or A.D. Walker.
Awesome. Well, listeners, thank you again for joining us for another author interview. This has been fantastic. Again, I want to thank A.D. Walker, Andrew Dewey for joining us today and providing insight into his work. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to listening to this and future podcasts that you release.
Thank you. And listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is where this interview will be featured on. I'll also have it featured on Anchor as well, so you can listen to the audio version, or you can watch it on YouTube, as I said, the whole video version. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.